Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into a case that, honestly, still sends chills down my spine. The Zodiac Killer.
It really does. A story filled with, brutal crimes, these incredibly cryptic ciphers, and just this shadowy figure who basically played games with everyone for years.
Exactly. A legacy of unanswered questions. So we're going to try and unpack the main theories, look at the key suspects, and talk about the amazing story behind cracking some of those really baffling codes. But before we dive headfirst into that mystery, we wanted to reach out to you, our fellow explorers on this journey. If these deep dives ignite your curiosity, if they help you see things in a new light, maybe consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the All Sorts podcast on YouTube.
Yeah, your support really does make a difference. It helps us keep digging, keep bringing these hidden stories out.
And seriously, to everyone who's already part of our community, thank you. Your dedication truly inspires us. And remember, you can find all our other deep dives, connect with us on X, Instagram, and Threads. Just look for All Sorts podcasts. Okay, so let's get into it. The Zodiac. Late 1960s, Northern California. We're talking brutal murders, and this guy had this disturbing habit of taunting police in the media. Letters, ciphers.
It's pretty wild when you think about it. He claimed, 37 murders? But officially, he's only concretely linked to 5 confirmed victims.
5 confirmed, yeah.
And yet he managed to stay unidentified for, over half a century. It became this huge thing in pop culture, right?
Yeah.
Pushed the limits for investigators and amateur detectives, too.
So let's quickly run through the confirmed victims just to set the scene. It started December 20, 1968. Betty Lou Jensen, just 16, and David Faraday, 17. Shot in their car, Lake Herman Road. Awful.
Really tragic. And then the next summer, July 4th, 1969, Darlene Ferrin, 22, killed. Michael Mageau, 19, survived. That was at Blue Rock Springs Park.
And Mageau's survival was crucial, right? He gave a description.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that attack, that's when the Zodiac himself called 911, claimed that attack, and the one from 68 said, I also killed those kids last year.
Yeah.
Goodbye. Just like that.
Chilling. That call tells you so much about his mindset.
Exactly. It wasn't just about the killing. It was performance. A twisted kind of dialogue he was having with, everyone. He was escalating the psychological game constantly.
And the attacks on young couples continued. September 27, 69, Lake Berryessa. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, both 22, tied up, stabbed.
Shepard sadly died, but Hartnell survived. Another survivor.
And the Zodiac actually marked their car door with the dates of the previous shootings.
Oh, yeah, leaving his mark, literally. Then came the taxi driver, Paul Stein, 29 years old, October 11, 1969, in San Francisco. Shot.
And this is where he sent that piece of Stan's bloody shirt to the San Francisco Chronicle. Just unbelievable audacity to prove it was him.
Maximum impact. He knew how to use the media.
Speaking of the media, let's talk about Paul Avery. He was a reporter for the Chronicle, right? And he got really drawn into this, maybe more than he wanted.
Oh, absolutely. Avery was doing significant work on the case. He actually linked a potential earlier murder from 1966 in Riverside to the Zodiac.
But then the Zodiac targeted him directly.
He did. Sent Avery this really unsettling Halloween card, even misspelled his name Averly. And the message warned, "You are doomed." It had this little rhyme. Something like, "I feel it in my bones you ache to know my name, and so I'll clue you in, but then why spoil the game?" Just incredibly menacing.
Wow. You can imagine the fear. I heard Avery started carrying a gun.
He did, a .38 revolver. And his colleagues, they made those famous "I am not Paul Avery" buttons. Pretty much everyone at the Chronicle wore one. It shows you just how real that threat felt.
That fear was palpable.
It was. Now, the 2007 movie Zodiac portrayed Avery's involvement, maybe suggesting the case kind of ruined him physically and mentally.
Right, I remember that depiction.
But his former colleague Lance Williams wrote later, I think in 2010, that it wasn't entirely accurate. Avery was a tough reporter, covered huge stories like Patty Hearst after the Zodiac stuff. So ruined might be too strong a word.
Okay, so beyond the threats, the calls, the shirt pieces, there were the ciphers, this other layer to his reign of terror. He'd threaten more attacks, bombings, if they weren't printed.
And that bizarre claim about collecting victims as slaves for the afterlife.
Yeah. What was that about? Trying to understand his motive must have been like navigating a maze. How did investigators even start with the codes?
Well, the first big one was the Z408 cipher. He sent it in 3 pieces to 3 different newspapers.
Right, to make sure it got attention.
Exactly. And incredibly, it was cracked in just 8 days. Not by the FBI or NSA initially, but by a couple, Donald and Betty Harden from Salinas. They just had an interest in codes.
Wow. Ordinary people.
Yeah. It was what's called a homophonic substitution cipher. Basically, multiple symbols could stand for the same letter. Like 3 different symbols might all mean E.
So that messes up the standard code-breaking techniques, like looking for the most common letters.
Precisely. Throws off basic frequency analysis.
Sure.
And the message, once decoded, was, well, chilling.
Oh.
I like killing because it is so much fun.
Ugh, just blunt. But that wasn't the hardest one, was it? There's another one, Z340.
That's the one, the Z340. Sent to the Chronicle November 8, 1969. That one became, like you said, the holy grail for cryptographers. It stumped everyone, FBI, NSA, amateur sleuths, for over 50 years.
50 years. What made it so much tougher than the first one?
It was just layers upon layers of complexity. You used 63 different symbols, again, multiple symbols for single letters. But crucially, he threw in deliberate misspellings.
Misspellings, like typos.
Intentional ones, it seems.
Yeah.
And transpositions, basically jumbling the letters around, shifting them out of their correct order. It added this whole other level of chaos to decode.
So how on earth did they finally crack it?
It was this amazing international collaboration finally broken on December 5th, 2020. You had David Oranchak, a software developer in the U.S., Sam Blake, a mathematician from Australia, and Jorrel van Eyck, a cipher expert in Belgium.
A global team effort. That's incredible.
It really was. And technology played a huge part. Van Eyck had developed this software, AZ Decrypt.
Easy to...
Yeah. They used a new feature in it, something that could automatically kind of guess where spaces might go in the decoded text. Made it much easier to spot potential words and phrases forming.
So it wasn't just brain power, but cutting-edge tools combined with that collaborative effort.
Exactly. It was a testament to, crowdsourced knowledge, modern software, things the Zodiac couldn't have possibly anticipated back in '69. It really changed the game for cold cases like this.
So what did the Z340 message actually say after all that effort?
It was just as disturbing, maybe more so because of the weight. It read, "I hope you were having lots of fun in trying to catch me that wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise. So they are afraid of death. I am not afraid because I know that my new life is life will be an easy one in paradise death."
Paradise. He misspelled paradise consistently, like a signature.
Exactly. Paradise. A very specific repeated quirk.
So Z408 and Z340 are correct. But there are still unsolved ones, right? Z13 and Z32.
Correct. Those two remain officially unsolved. There have been claims, sure, like a French engineer, Faisal Zeraoui, suggested he solved them, revealing a name, Care, and maybe coordinates for a school.
But not confirmed by police?
No, not officially validated. And there was another possible cipher, maybe from '73. A History Channel show decoded it, and it's supposedly named a Connie Henley in Albany, New York.
Connie Henley. Why was that significant?
Well, it raised eyebrows because the maiden name of Phyllis Seawater, whose family became linked to a major suspect later, was Hensley. And her daughter, Connie, was living in New York around that time. So more speculation, more connections, but still nothing definitive.
Which brings us to the biggest question of all.
Yeah.
After all this time, all the clues, the ciphers, who was the Zodiac Killer?
That is the question. Thousands of names have been thrown around over the decades. The SFPD alone investigated something like 2,500 potential suspects by 2009.
2,500.
Yeah, and the FBI to this day maintains the case is open, unsolved.
But there's one name that always comes up, the only one police ever publicly named as a suspect, right? Arthur Lee Allen.
Arthur Lee Allen, yes. Former elementary school teacher, convicted sex offender. Died back in 1992. He's definitely the most prominent suspect.
So let's unpack the case for Allen. What pointed towards him?
Well, there's a fair bit of circumstantial stuff. He lived just minutes away from Darlene Ferrin, one of the victims. He got fired from his teaching job for sexual misconduct just months before the first confirmed Zodiac murders.
Okay, timing.
Right. He owned military-style boots, and footprints matching that type were found at the Lake Berryessa scene. He also owned a Zodiac brand, watch the brand name, and its logo was similar to the symbol the killer used.
The watch. That's pretty specific.
It is. Plus, survivor Michael Mageau apparently identified Allen from a photo lineup years later, and police seized a Royal typewriter from his place. The type Elite was similar to one used for a letter possibly linked to Zodiac.
Okay, that sounds compelling, but obviously not enough, or the case would be closed. What's the evidence against Allen?
And this is where it gets tricky, why it's still cold. The big one is DNA. In 2002, they managed to get a partial DNA profile from saliva on stamps used on Zodiac letters.
Okay.
That profile excluded Arthur Lee Allen. It also excluded another person of interest, Donald Cheney.
Excluded him, and that seems pretty definitive.
Well, yes and no. There have been arguments about the DNA itself. Was it definitely from the saliva of the sender? Or could it have been contamination from someone handling the envelope later? It's debated. But beyond DNA, Allen's fingerprints didn't match prints found at the Paul Stein taxi scene.
Fingerprints didn't match?
Nope. And Officer Don Fook, who might have briefly seen the Zodiac near the Stein scene, said Allen was heavier than the man he saw. The police dispatcher, Nancy Slover, who took that chilling 911 call, said Allen's voice didn't match the caller's.
Voice didn't match, description didn't quite fit.
And handwriting experts, at least one retired police expert, looked at Allen's writing compared to the Zodiac letters and said it wasn't a match either. So, compelling points for him, but also really significant points against him.
Then there was that recent Netflix documentary, This is the Zodiac Speaking, from 2024. That brought up some new, pretty shocking allegations from the Seawater family, friends of Allen.
Yeah, that added another layer.
Yeah.
The family claimed Allen actually confessed to one of them, David Seawater, shortly before Allen died in 1992.
A deathbed confession, essentially.
Sort of. The documentary also detailed these other disturbing incidents from years earlier, like Allen allegedly showing up with blood on his hands after leaving the Seawater kids alone in a car near an unsolved shooting back in '63, and claims he molested Connie Seawater around the time of another potential Zodiac victim, Cherie Jo Bates, in Riverside in '66.
Wow. That's heavy stuff. But again, these are allegations emerging decades later. Hard to verify definitively now.
Exactly. Compelling narrative, but brings up questions about memory, timing, and proof after so much time has passed. Allen remains this central, deeply ambiguous figure.
So Allen is the main official suspect, but definitely not the only name seriously considered. Who else has been in the frame?
Oh, there have been several others who've gained traction. Paul Dewar, for instance, he was featured in the book, How to Find Zodiac. North Bay resident, right age range, published these fanzines.
Fanzines?
Yeah, and apparently the writing had some weird parallels talking about Minutemen groups, bomb formulas like the Zodiac mentioned, interest in codes, owned a similar knife, talked about afterlife slaves. Circumstantial, but a lot of little things. Even his daughter was apparently quite struck by the research.
Interesting. Who else? I remember hearing about Gary Francis Post.
Right, Gary Francis Post. An independent group, the Case Breakers, claimed he was the Zodiac in 2021. Lots of headlines.
But the FBI pushed back on that one pretty quickly.
Immediately. Said the case remains open. Local police were skeptical too, basically saying it was circumstantial evidence, nothing concrete to close the case on Post.
Okay. Any others with strong links?
Well, there's Lawrence Kane. He was actually identified in a photo lineup by Kathleen Johns, who survived a Zodiac abduction attempt. And victim Darlene Farron's sister said she recognized Kane as someone who'd harassed Darlene. Plus, he had a history of voyeurism and prowling.
And Richard Gaikowski?
Gaikowski was a reporter. His appearance apparently resembled one of the Zodiac sketches. And the Vallejo police dispatcher, Nancy Slover, again, supposedly identified his voice as matching the Zodiac's call. Though the reliability of that specific voice ID has been questioned by some researchers.
Voice ID seems tricky after so long.
Very. And one more often mentioned is Ross Sullivan. He was a library assistant. Co-workers suspected him after the Cherie Jo Bates murder in Riverside. He apparently looked like the sketches, wore those military-style boots. Again, circumstantial, but suspicious to those who knew him.
It's just this web of possibilities. But it's also crucial to remember who's been ruled out, right? To show how wide the net was cast.
Absolutely critical. Official investigations using fingerprints, DNA when possible, solid alibis, have cleared some really high-profile names that people sometimes speculate about.
Like Charles Manson. Ted Bundy.
Yeah, Manson, Bundy, David Carpenter, the Trailside Killer, active in the same general area later. Even Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber.
Kaczynski. Why him?
Well, he had that interest in codes, sent threatening letters, targeted academics and technology. Some surface similarities. But he's been definitively ruled out by investigators. Listing the ruled-out suspects really underlines the sheer scale of this investigation over the years.
It truly does. Thousands investigated, many cleared, but still no definitive who.
And that really leads to the big question. Why does this mystery endure so strongly? Many experts, armchair detectives, they speculate the real Zodiac might be someone we've, never really heard of. Someone completely on the fringes, maybe never even on the police's main radar. Or maybe just someone who died long ago, taking the secret with them.
The sheer number of plausible suspects, yet the lack of that final piece of incontrovertible evidence for any one of them. It just highlights the immense challenge of cold cases.
It really does. It shows how sometimes, even with intense effort, the truth can remain elusive.
So, the Zodiac Killer. Still out there, metaphorically speaking, one of the most enduring enigmas in the history of crime. Ciphers cracked, decades of investigation, countless theories. But that fundamental question, who was he? It just hangs there.
It's more than just the murders, isn't it? The case taps into something deeper. That human need for answers, for resolution. It shows the limits of investigation, even now. And it makes you think about how information flows today, online forums, theories spreading. Did all that actually help, or does it just muddy the waters further?
That's a really good point.
And maybe this is the provocative thought to leave with you. When a definitive answer stays just out of grasp, despite all our modern tools, all our collective brain power focused on it for decades, does the mystery itself become the most significant part of the Zodiac's legacy?
Wow. Does the mystery become the story? A truly haunting thought. We'll leave you with that until our next deep dive.